Marguerite is here as well, another survivor of one of my consultations. Marguerite's was really cool because what we did is she's got a Kickstarter coming up, and I did a top-down evaluation of her Kickstarter before she has hit the button on it. So this is a pre-flight. And I went down and talked about some of the problems that I could see, some of the pitfalls. We fixed her rewards, so it formed a much better Kickstarter ladder. If you've heard me on the ComicLab podcast, you've heard me talk about the Kickstarter ladder. I ended up delivering a 13-page written consultation that I sent her at the end of this hour-long conversation, and I cannot wait to see Marguerite push the button on this Kickstarter. I think she's going to go gangbusters. But those are the kinds of things that I offer in the consultation. All right. So, Corey's here. Good, Corey. We talked about Corey. You're going to be a minor character in an upcoming ComicLab podcast where I referenced the conversation that you and I had here on the live stream last week when we were talking about branding. It turned into a really great conversation. But without further ado, I'm going to kick off the first topic. This one was written in by Erie earlier, and it's such a great conversation. I'm going to use it to kick off our conversation. But in the meantime, as you're joining us, if you've got a question, if you've got a topic that you'd like us to talk about together, whether it's about art and writing, whether it's about the aesthetics, the craft, like lettering, I'm here for it. But if you want to go even into some of those other areas of independent publishing, like using social media wisely, merchandising, crowdfunding, things of that nature, we can absolutely talk about that as well. So put those topics and questions in the chat. Erie says that her book is coming out in August. It's called Crown of Bones, and the release party will be a live burlesque show in Syracuse. And you can find out more on her socials. Yeah, I'm gonna try to get up to that because I would love to see that. I got to make sure my calendar. The NCS annual convention is in August as well, so I got to make sure that my calendar is clear. Scott Kurtz joining us, one of the greats. Thank you so much for joining us. So Scott actually knows a little bit. He's heard me go through this conversation before, so this will be old. But Erie writes in and says, "Hey, how do I deal with booth barnacles?" And she's envisioning being at a comic convention or some other kind of convention, maybe selling these comics at her burlesque show. And she knows through talking to people who have been at comic conventions. She knows that booth barnacles is a thing. It's a thing that people deal with, right? Oh, and by the way, because I am who I am, I have to tell you this. I have contributed very little to the culture at large. Booth barnacle, I can find no earlier reference to that word than the comic strip that I released as part of my original Greystone Inn comic strip. I just dropped the link there where I talked about on Blue Sky. Booth barnacle is my word. I coined that. I can't find anyone to dispute that. So I'll say that until they tell me to shut up. So booth barnacle, what do you do when you got somebody at your booth and you can't get them to leave? They just hang out and hang out. And this happens an awful lot. And by the way, before we go any further, I want you to know that when we talk about people who maybe have a little bit of social awkwardness and everything, and this is very common at comic conventions, I'm one of those people. I'm very good like this when I've got a camera in between the two of us, but in real life, I am super super awkward. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm so much more comfortable in my studio. So when I talk about social awkwardness, I want you to know I've got two fingers pointed right back at me. But you've got somebody and they're not picking up that this conversation's over. All right. And the first thing that I do in a situation like that is I try to use a lot of phrases that are very clearly words and phrases you'd use at the end of a conversation. For example, I'll shake their hand and pat their shoulder. And by the way, that shoulder pat's going to come into play a little bit later. Keep that in the back of your mind. But I am a handshaky kind of guy. Maybe you're not, but I shake their hand and I'll say things like, "Oh man, I'm so glad that you stopped by," past tense, and I really enjoyed talking with you, past tense, right? And I start to use conclusion statements like that, all in the past tense. This is something that has happened, it's here, and it's gone. We're not doing this anymore. A lot of times, and the handshake helps too. You shake hands at the beginning and at the end of social interactions very routinely. Uh, that usually works. That very often works. But then again, sometimes it doesn't. And you have to keep coming up with those conclusion statements, past tense statements a few more times. Sometimes they'll just keep talking, and that's okay. It's a little bit more awkward if they're not asking questions, if they're not talking, but they're just standing there, blocking traffic in a lot of cases, or just maybe paging through one of your books. If that happens, if they're not like really interfering with you talking to other people, I'll just kind of direct them to the edge of the table. I'll ask them, "Hey, I'm so happy you're going to hang out for a little bit longer. But I'm just going to ask you to move down to the side of the table so that I can talk to some of the other people. Some of the other people might be able to see some of my stuff, and I'll move the person down." Now, if they're sticking around a little extra long, then your next step, your step two, is to start giving them a hard sale, making it a little uncomfortable for them. The longer they're going to stand there, the longer I'm going to suggest they buy either their first item if they haven't bought anything, or buy something else, or buy something new. Or if they said no to the first thing, I'll offer them the second thing. You understand what I'm saying? I'm going to start pitching them over and over and over again. If you don't like the book, maybe you'd like the pin. Maybe if you don't like the pin, you'd like some original art, blah, blah, blah. The longer they're standing there, the more I'm going to start selling to them. They get the point at that point. They don't want to be sold to. They don't want to keep telling me that they don't want to buy my stuff, right? So that's my step two. Okay. And the step three, and I've done this, I've talked about this at conventions. I want you to understand this is a lot more lighter than I think people understand. But remember that shoulder pad I told you? If I've gone through all those steps and it's not happening, I'll give one last attempt at getting them cleaved from my booth, and I'll give them that handshake again. Thank you so much. I had such a fun time talking to you. And I'll give them a little shoulder pat, except on the third shoulder pat, it's not so much of a pat as it's a push. And I just try to get the momentum going to get them. Sometimes all they need is a little momentum, and then they flit off and go someplace else. Again, not a hard push, it's gentle. Look, I'm a gentle person. I don't push people at comic conventions. I've had so many people when I tell this story, they clearly think that I'm around there pushing them like a bulldozer. No, you just give them a little nudge, a little hand. Let's go. Sometimes that doesn't work. Even that doesn't work. And I've got to fall back for that. This is when it's always a good idea to have a friend that you're working the convention with, or make a friend. Always, Geiger's rule number one of doing comic conventions: show up on the first day with donuts, and make sure that the people to your left have donuts, make sure the people to your right have donuts, people across the aisle have donuts. You make a lot of friends with donuts. And if you don't have a friend, make a friend. And this is when it's a good idea to have a signal, a little ear pull, or a little wink, or do that, and say, and let that person know, I need you. And then what I've actually done is, if I've got a friend there, and I won't throw this friend under the bus, but we've actually done that. I'll take a picture of one of my elderly family members, and I've got my friend obviously programmed into my phone. I'll make that elderly uh, family member his avatar when he calls me. So he'll call me. I'll have the name changed from my friend to Grandpa. Grandpa's picture comes up with me standing alongside of him. And when Grandpa comes up, I'll say, "Oh," and I'll just flash him the phone. "Oh my goodness, my 90 years old, this guy, I got to take this call. Please come back in an hour or so and we'll continue this conversation. I really want to talk to my grandfather." Nobody can say no to talking to your grandfather. And this one works all 75% of the time. That one works all the time. You've got a phone call from grandfather. If you can set up your booth that you can put a curtain down. Dave Kellett does this at San Diego Comic-Con all the time. He actually separates his booth space into he's got a square space. He actually has it has it divided in the middle on a diagonal. The front facing triangle is for everybody else, is for, that's the aisle facing, that's all the people. The back facing triangle is all his supplies. It's all cut off with a curtain, and he's got a little chair back there, and he can actually go behind the curtain and take a little break for a while, which at San Diego is very important, as you might imagine. And he can actually hide there. Not that he'd ever do that, but I'll just say if he wanted to, he could hide back there. Okay, and wait until the barnacle moves on. So there's my 4-step process of getting rid of booth barnacles. It's something that happens. It comes out of a good place. Let me tell you this, just to wrap up this conversation. I'll see if we've got other topics over there in the chat. But I will say this about that, and that is, I've spent an I've spent a lot of time with people who wanted to talk to me so much that they wouldn't leave. I've had those experiences. I've also had this experience. Nobody wanted to talk to me at all. Nobody gave two shits, or I don't know whether Substack lets you swear. They didn't give no two shnikes over whether Brad Guigar was there or not. And once they saw he was there, they really didn't care. They didn't want to talk to Brad Guigar. And I've had both of those experiences. And as frustrating as a barnacle can be, let me tell you, that other experience is a lot worse. That one you really don't. I spent a year in my life one weekend at the Toronto Comic Con, and literally, you got that phrase, I was rethinking my life choices. I really was rethinking. In fact, as a matter of fact, on the plane ride home from that, Greystone Inn came to an end and Evil Inc. began, because I just looked at this and I said, this is not working. This is not working at all. If you have a little bit of time, somebody asked me this earlier. If you, and I'll hit the chat there, if you would be able to consider Evil Inc. as the best humor webcomic in the Ringo Awards. Those nominations are open, and everybody can sign up and nominate comics. If you thought Evil Inc. was a funny comic this year and you wanted to nominate it, I would be thrilled. And the information is down there in the chat. I did a consultation just yesterday about Kickstarter. And one of the things that we came up against in my consultation was that this person did not have a very clear Kickstarter ladder. And I talk about Kickstarter ladders all the time on the ComicLab podcast. This is a good time to go into that again. And that is, every one of your reward tiers has to kind of lead to the next one. And the whole idea is you kind of always start them off with a PDF or a digital ebook or e-comic, and you go, you can have this for just X amount of dollars, right? And it's a very slow, small buy-in there. It's not a huge buy-in. Hey, John Wigger's joining us. How you doing, John? So you start very low, and then the whole idea is what you say is, but for a little bit more money, you could have this. And it's a little bit nicer gift, right? Or a nicer reward. And then you say, for a little bit more money, you get this next thing. Now you're working them up to the physical book. Then you work them up to an artist edition. And I just found out that not everybody knows what an artist edition is. So I can circle around back to that as well. But then you work them up. And the whole idea is, for a little bit more, you get the next thing. For a little bit more, you get the next thing. And you can do a lot of fun things with a Kickstarter ladder because you have values and expected values, right? So a value, for example, is your book. Your book is going to retail for $25. That is the value of that book. And that's very easy to clarify. But what's the value of an ebook or a digital collection? It's a lot harder because there wasn't any cost necessarily that went into that. That you can be a lot more free with. And I'm going to give you some counter advice, or advice that's counter to what you might think. I usually try to price those a little bit high. That's because when you give stuff away for free, it has no value, and people don't. Who wants to have something that doesn't have value, right? The value is what you put into it. So if I have a free comic, and this is why I always get a little bit upset when I see people on Blue Sky, for example, saying, "Hey, come check out my free comic," and I'm like, "No, don't say that. Tell them why it's good, not that it's free. Tell them why it's good." But I'll price my e-comics a little bit higher, maybe to the $1.99 or $4.99 zone, because not only does that make it more impressive when I give them away. I just got a $5 gift. If I have a free e-comic and a book that retails for $25, and I'm giving that reward away for $20, technically that value is $30, but I'm giving it away for $20. And don't think for a minute people aren't good at doing that kind of math. You'll get everybody says, "Oh, I'm not good at math." They do that math real quick. And some of those values are values you just made up in your head, right? That $4.99 PDF, that's why you're making a big mistake if you're giving that away for free. Why? Because you didn't give it value, right? You didn't give it value. And also don't forget, all of these prices to a certain extent are yours to control. In other words, I can put out a comic for $4.99, and then I can sell it on my store for $2, right? Or $1.99. And boom, there's that whole value discussion coming in again. And it doesn't matter a bit because I'm the one who set the price. And I can make it afford. I can make you think that I'm giving you a $5 item for $2.50, for example. And at the end of the day, it's the same thing. I just sent you a PDF, right? But you gave it value. You got to really think when you're putting price on something. So Angela just jumped in, and Angela says, "Any tips on teaching comics?" That's pretty broad, but it's more of a 1 to 4 week class at my discretion. Here's the main thing that I want to say about teaching comics, other than the basics. Like when you get a bunch of people in and they want to learn comics. There's a bunch of stuff that we're like, people like us, like the first thing, Angela, in your class is probably going to be to tell them that they need to do the lettering first, right? Because you see all those comics that they drew the word balloon and then they tried to cram the words inside the word balloon. You're like, no, 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 no. I'm going to make you look better overnight. Do the lettering first, then draw the word balloon around it. It's stuff like that. You're going to do that right off the bat, and it's stuff like those sorts of things. But the main thing about teaching comics is just to kind of lay out some of those basics, some of those panel to panel discussions. You can always turn them on to Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics for, more reading and stuff like that. But your main thing, especially a 1 to 4 week class, is just to go in there and have fun. And because there's a lot of things that happen on one side of the spectrum. You've got a lot of their teachers still in this day and age who told them that comics aren't real art, that comics aren't valuable, that it's a low art, and so on and so forth. So on one side of the spectrum, they've got a whole lot of people telling them that they shouldn't even mess around with comics. And on the other side of the spectrum, you might have some purists who say, well, listen, the only kind of true comic is the kind that Stan and Jack did in the 1960s, in the heyday of the Marvel Comics. And or you'll get anime fans or manga fans, more accurately, who don't want to hear about American comics, and you newspaper strip people who don't really accept the wider world in their purview. There's all kinds of things. The world of comics is huge. It includes political cartoons, New Yorker cartoonists, all comic books, graphic novels, serious, not so serious, not safe for work. There's all of those things fit inside the purview of comics. Your job in a 4 week class is to let those folks loose and to applaud every direction that they go, because every direction they're going to take it is going to be a good direction. And what they're looking for from any kind of an instructor isn't so much format and form and you must do this. You can take them any direction you want and say, oh, I got a little tip here that's gonna polish that up. Have you considered digital lettering? Or here's how you can do that in Clip Studio. Or here's a good tip for working in pen and ink. Do your pencils in blue pencils, and then when you scan them, that blue's going to disappear. All the stuff that you know, just because you've been doing comics for more than a day, you're going to be able to help these folks along. But I wouldn't get all wound up into teaching form and function and stuff like that. I'd give them a few basics, and then I would give them a carte blanche to just lay loose. And then I would put everybody's work up, and hopefully it's all as different as the next, and just say, take a look at this, and these are all comics, and this is all good. Now let's talk about how to improve each one of them, maybe just a little bit. I think you do that in a 4-week class, and you've generated a whole lot of people with a passion for comics. Scott Kurtz says my imposter syndrome is keeping me from offering cartooning consultations. Well, I think I don't know what to tell you there, Scott. You are one of the leading voices in comics. You have way more of a right to give a comics consultation than I do, and I don't let that shit hold me back. You order a comics consultation, I'll jump on Zoom with you as soon as this live stream is done. Here's what I want you to instead of thinking of yourself as a consultant, think of and in fact you see me parsing it this way a lot when I'm talking about it. I'll say, hey, let's talk comics. Let's sit down with what you're doing and come and over the course of an hour, let's talk about like just the same thing I just got done telling to Angela. Let's talk about one or two ways that you can kind of improve just based on the fact that I've been doing this every day of my life for the past couple of decades, right? It might help for you if you don't think yourself of yourself as somebody that's got to come in and correct everything that they do. And you might also say, I'm only interested in talking about these subjects, right? I'll talk about this, and this. And then some of the subjects that maybe you don't feel as comfortable talking about, or you don't feel like you've got a lot to say about that subject, just self edit that out. We're going to talk about here's the sorts of things that I'm interested in talking about. I think that, and the rest of it, I just as a friend, with love in my heart for you. Don't be a dummy. You are a smart guy. You're one of you're one of the top names. You could do a consultation. Anybody would be dumb if they wouldn't want to do a consultation with you. If I had a brain rattling around between my ears, I would be talking you out of this. Because if I had a choice of talking to you or talking to me, I would talk to you. But no, I wouldn't let that hold you back. You're a smart guy, and you're also a very likable guy. You're so fun to talk to. You could jump on these chats, and in the course of an hour, I can tell you this. I can tell you this because I just had one with Marguerite. We were talking yesterday on and about her Kickstarter. Charlie's in the chat, I think. Still, we talked with Charlie. In fact, Charlie's come back for a couple of writing sessions. Uh, you're going to get as much out of this as the person you're talking to. You're going to, I got done talking to Marguerite yesterday and I was charged up. I was ready to take on the world. After a nap, I was a little tired. I needed to take a nap because I wore myself out. But after I woke up from that nap, I was ready to take on the world. You know, there's a lot of good, especially you are much more of an extrovert than I am. You need interpersonal conversations. I could be a hermit very easily. Uh, you're going to find that you feed off of this. This is something that kind of makes your heart happy. Uh, I wouldn't hesitate. I can't encourage you strongly enough. Devin says, I'm thinking about switching my 4-panel gag comic to a long form format, and expanding the brief world I've created. Is this a bad idea? Would I be better off starting with a new concept instead of building on this short form comic. So if you've listened to the Comic Lab podcast, you know that I have uh, really defined attitudes on four panel comics. I think four panel comics, especially in the social media landscape that we've got today, it's harder to tell a longer story. You can tell stories in short bursts, but it's harder to do things like character development and stuff like that. So I often, as a matter of fact, is JC? Yeah, JC just jumped in before you, Devin, and hopefully it's okay that I say this, JC. If it's not, you can just you can just jump into the chat and say he's a big dumb liar, and I'll say, yep, you're right. I was confusing you for somebody else. Okay. This was a conversation I had with JC, right? He was doing a really good, not safe for work comic called Blooming Fairies. Loved it back then, love it now. But he was doing kind of a four panel, and it just wasn't enough. And I jumped into a conversation with him one day and I said, what would happen if you took a bigger story swing? If you, instead of doing four panels, you looked at it as maybe whatever book you might want to one day do, think about it as a larger page, give you maybe 6 panels or 7 panels, right? To give yourself more time to get into that story and make that story happen. What would happen? And we talked about it back and forth, and I finally convinced him. Oh, good. JC says I can. So it turns out that I wasn't lying. This is actually a true story. JC, JC said, uh, let me think about that. And he redid his comic and reimagined it as a long form comic instead of trying to do a story in 4 panels. And believe me, listen, I spent a decade trying to tell stories in 4 panels. I know the power and I don't know the limitations. And I can tell you from personal experience, when I did those longer story swings, a typical update for me is 7 panels. Okay, that gives me a lot more time with my sense of humor to not only introduce the topic, but to give myself a little bit of time to get to that joke, also do the storytelling, hit the story beats that I want to hit on that day, and then find the punchline at the end. A lot of people tell you sometimes I don't find the punchline, but that's how this thing works. But 7 panels fits much better for me than 4 panels did. Okay. So, what you're talking about doing, Devin, especially if you are doing if you want to tell stories, if you want stories to go on continuously, doing a long form comic is I think a really great idea. There's no reason to get locked. A lot of us all fell in love with newspaper comics, and you'll still see people putting their comics in a horizontal strip and putting it up on social media like Blue Sky as 4 strips right in a row. We can't read it on our phones. We don't know why they did it, but there it is. Even if you had something like that, if you split it between 2 panels on top and 2 on the bottom, like Schultz used to do, you could do that. But my point is, even beyond social media posting, a lot of us fell in love with newspaper comics, and so of course we imitated that form and that function. But people don't read comics in newspapers anymore. They read them on these small screens that, like the one that you're looking at me at right now, and that means our formatting has to change. That's something that we've got to swing with. We were all introduced to newspaper comics in those 4 panels because that worked great in the newspaper. Uh, Nobody reads the newspaper anymore. And that's why you have to rethink. And Devin, what you're talking about is doing that kind of rethinking. And I think it's a great idea. I would encourage you 100% if you're telling long form stories to break out of that 4 panel format as quickly as possible. Charlie says, how do you feel about drawing and writing at the same time? I see creators writing their strips and drawing stick figures while writing to help convey the idea, or should a beginner stick to writing without thumbs at first? The answer to that question is yes. The answer to that question is everybody's different. Everybody has their own creative process. There's some people like me. I work very much with the words because I've got a very visual imagination. So I kind of see everything in my head. Some people make thumbs. And by the way, especially if you're a beginner, thumbnails are a much better way to go because there's all these problems that are going to hop up in front of you that you're not going to see until you sketch them out. The answer is yes. Whatever you, the biggest problem I think that creative people get into is they say, well, what's the right way to do this? And the answer is there is no right way to do this. It's your way and everybody else's way. And you got to spend a little bit of time finding your way. There's no wrong way. You do it your way. Your brain is your tool. And if I could, I would be the dumbest guy in the world to try to tell you to try to use my brain. I can barely use my brain. So let's talk about long form comics presentation because I don't want to keep harping on these comics consultations, but it's just this happened last week on a consultation where I was talking to a guy who's doing a long form comic, and I said, if you want to build audience on the web and you want your best chances of building audience, I'll tell you what my thoughts are. And I said he was doing a long form comic. And I said, first of all, the first thing you got to do is stop thinking about pages as social media updates. A lot of us do this, right? They think, here's the next page, I'll post the next page. I think that's a bad way to look at it. It's a knee jerk way to look at it. It might be accurate in 90% of the times, but it's also something that you shouldn't take for granted. Okay. So here's what I said. First of all, a page is not an update. What you need in a social media update or a Substack update for that matter, what you need is an entry. Every one of these updates needs an entry point and a point of significance at the end. Every one of your updates have to have those two things, an entry point and a point of significance. And you can see I'm going here. If you are publishing comics on Substack, check that article out. It's got a whole lot of good advice for you. Uh, but your long form has to have an entry point and a point of significance. Every one of those updates has to have that. Now, if you're looking at your comics page and you don't have that, particularly we're going to talk about here the point of significance at the end, you might have to post 2 pages to get to that point of significance, right? When I do my pages on Evil Inc., my pages are more of a European comic size. A page of Evil Inc. is usually about 14 panels. So what I do is I post the top of the page on Tuesday and I post the bottom of the page on Thursday. And when I post those, I bend over backwards to make sure that each one of those updates has a point of significance and, an entry point and a point of significance. That means when you're reading the page, hopefully, if I'm doing a good job as a writer, there's 2 punchlines on that page, right? From the top half and the bottom half. Or there's something interesting that happens at the halfway point and at the end of that page. And I try to do that as steady as a clicking talk. A clicking talk, a talking click. I try to do it steady. I try to keep it going. Okay. So let's talk about doing that. We had this conversation. This is word for word. This conversation that I had on this consultation. I said, okay, let's talk about the point of significance. Now, a lot of people give me pushback on this because they say, well, I don't want my comic to read like the Spider-Man newspaper comic. And that, if you're familiar, it had a very certain format. Panel 1 was recap. Panel 2 was story. Panel 3 was like a cliffhanger. Here's what's coming up tomorrow, right? It's horrible to read a story that way. It worked fine for newspapers, but newspapers are dead. It had a 3-panel format. But I said, this is not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is every time you post on social media, you should have something at the beginning, either the first panel of that comic you're posting that day or something else that you build in. Remember, you don't have to just be limited to posting the page. So when I post, for example, I'm going to go to Substack because that's where we are. If I'm posting my comic on Substack, I'll put a little, either maybe a sentence at the top, or I'll pull a panel from a previous comic that introduces the topic. And then I'll go into today's update. But I first have to satisfy myself that that person who just met me last Thursday and just came into the story on page 12, they have some kind of fighting chance of knowing what's going on. Because here's the dirty little secret. If you don't do that, you're not going to build an audience. You can't build an audience on today's internet doing that. You can't do it because every day on social media, somebody's meeting you for the first time. And if your comic doesn't capture them in that moment, they've got so many things to scroll to that they're not going to really, they're going to look at your comic in the middle on page 12. You didn't give them an entry point and they don't care. They're on to the next thing. And you didn't build audience. If you want to build an audience, you need to have an entry point. That doesn't mean that you have to have like that Spider-Man comic strip, that recap panel every time. You can do that in a number of ways. You're a creative person. You probably could think of a different way to do that. That would be good, right? Uh, but you need an entry point and then a moment of significance at the end of that update. Remember, not the page, but the update. A moment of significance. Something happens. A punchline, a surprise, something that is crucial. A cliffhanger works here, but I got to be careful when I say cliffhangers because I did this on ComicLab and somebody wrote back and said, "Oh, that's great. I'm going to do a cliffhanger on every page." And I said, "That's going to be a horrible book. Don't do that." you can't have it gets deadening to have a cliffhanger happen every page flip. Oh my god. Oh my god. Okay, I'm done. So cliffhanger every now and again, but something's got to happen. Something's got to happen if you want to build audience. That's that's just the truth. You've got to have something happen there on that update. Remember, a page is not an update. Update's not a page. JC has a question about NSFW content. By the way, I want to coming up here sometime. I'm going to plan this. I want to do an entire live stream where we just talk about NSFW for lots of reasons. Number one, my heart is in NSFW very firmly. It's a great, valid part of comics, and also there's a real need for mentorship for younger people, maybe who are thinking about doing this. There's all kinds of things to navigate for adult content, and not a lot of people willing to be mentors because a lot of people are kind of uneasy about talking about that sort of thing. Me, I like I said, when there's a camera here, I can talk about anything. So I want to do an NSFW live stream sometime and talk about things for people who want to learn more about that and talk about it in a very realistic way. Being raised, JC says, in a highly Catholic Providence, I was first very uncomfortable with NSFW language and terminology. Took me years to get comfortable with it. How was it for you? If you think you were raised Catholic, I don't want to try to out Catholic you, but I was raised very Catholic. It took a long time. I'll tell you what happened to me, really honestly. I'll go through the whole thing. So my history in comics, I I was like, hey, I think I might want to do NSFW comics. Patreon was happening at this point. The ad network that had used to pay a lot of my bills had just bottomed right out. The bottom had dropped out of internet advertising. I had left my day job at that point, and was relying on advertising revenue, and that had bottomed out by 2013 because of ad blockers. And I saw some people doing NSFW comics, and one of them I think is still in the room, John Wigger. And I reached out to John and I said, "Hey, tell me about what you're doing." And he kind of gave me the outline very kindly. Said, "Yeah, here's what I'm doing. Pop, pop, pop. Here's some of the things you should think about." And so I did one NSFW on Patreon, and I got a big response from the audience that I had cultivated at that point. And they're like, "Hey, this is kind of cool. We like this." And so then, now that I had opened up the can of worms, I got to ask myself, how do I feel about this? How does Catholic Brad Guigar or former Catholic Brad Guigar feel about this? And I talked with my wife. I said, how do you feel about it? She was 100% for it. But she says, really, it comes down to how do you feel about this? And I said, I had a long kind of talk with myself in the studio, kind of a gut check. And at the end of the day, JC, it came down to this for me. It came down to is sex normal and natural? That's really what it comes down to. Is sex normal? Yes, sex is normal. Is sex natural? Of course, sex is natural. Uh, if sex is normal and if sex is natural, then it stands to reason that stories about sex are normal and natural. They're valid. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to put my sex stories out where anybody can see them and willy nilly throw them around. It's not that that doesn't come with certain responsibilities from the creator, but it also means that doing these stories is valid. And then once I started doing them, once I kind of got my head straight on that, then I found out that it was a way bigger writing challenge than I had given it credit for. And I really liked the writing challenge because I mean, without getting too graphic here, sex is kind of a repetitive friction based activity. There's 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 a lot of repetition, and repetition breeds boredom, at least on a comics page. And what I found out very, very quickly was that if I didn't want to bore my readers with NSFW content, as weird as that sounds to anybody else, it wasn't enough to just to have them pop into the bedroom. But when my readers cared about what brought them to the bedroom, when the thing that brought them to this point is interesting, right? Uh, Whenever you see somebody post something that's like an adult film, the first comment underneath is always, I fast forward through this part. The thing about it is, that's the part my readers love, right? That's the part that is interesting. That's the part that's compelling, the thing that brings them to this point. Then, when that activity happens, it has meaning. Well, I found out that instilling that meaning instilling that meaning was a really great writing challenge. It was really, and I loved the writing challenge of making that happen. And if you think the writing challenge is great, wait till you get into the drawing challenge because. And again, I'm not going to get too graphic, but if you're an artist, think about how hard it is to draw two people dancing, right? A ballroom dancing competition, getting all of the all the anatomy to line up right so they look like they're dancing. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. Uh, NSFW comics are a tremendous art challenge. I drew a page yesterday. I literally spent the entire afternoon on it because it was such a great challenge. I slowed down and just savored every minute of it because it was a real tough page for me to bring out. It was amazing. And you know what? I was so proud of how it looked when I was done. It was tremendous. It was too good. And once I was off to doing that, and once I kind of told myself, hey, you know what? You know, it's actually honest to goodness, doing NSFW comics has given me the chance to have a bigger conversation with my audience about things like consent and how consent is not only meaningful and important and sexy, but like it comes into storytelling in ways that you're not expecting. Right? I'll give you the perfect example for all of those of you who love oldies. There was a great song called "Love Potion Number Nine," right? And we see love potions and hypnotism and all kinds of things brought into popular culture. On the Super Friends, I think Darkseid had Wonder Woman under mind control. We see these themes in storytelling an awful lot. Love potions in this. And then, but in my comic, the next thing you got to ask is, can that person consent? And if the answer is no, then the storytelling has to address that and take a certain turn, right? Or otherwise, you know, I might be putting some stuff out into the world that I'm not proud of. Everything that I put out into the world, especially my NSFW stuff, I'm very proud of. right? But it's an opportunity to have that conversation in the story. And that's an important conversation to have. That's why I say I'm a little bit passionate about mentorship in the NSFW community. John says humor comics build to a punchline. Something like Marvel builds to reveal or action. How does the different focus dictate presentation? Uh, it's all the same story. It's all this, in my opinion, it's all the same story, whether it's a punchline or a reveal. You're going to find that all the same mechanics come into play. So there is no difference for me in the presentation. All that stuff that I said about entry point and point of significance applies to humor, applies to drama, applies to sci-fi, all the way through. All of storytelling. In fact, when I was teaching a storytelling class at University of the Arts, one of my big lectures was, if you want to learn storytelling, learn to tell a good joke. If you can learn how to tell a good joke, you've got the basics of storytelling right there, because it's all about introducing a topic, building tension around that topic, and then releasing that tension. That's the basics of humor. It's also the basics of an action adventure story. It's also the basics of sci fi storytelling. It's all the same thing. It's all the same ingredients. We're just putting them out in different ways. You know how Taco Bell just has basically 5 ingredients and they can make a whole menu of stuff? Same thing with writers, okay? Uh, I'm asking because with humor, you get like 4 panels in the punchline. Drama is more drawn out. It can be. And there's where I think there might be a more limited, don't limit yourself is what I'm going to say, because that story, that moment of significance doesn't have to be the big reveal where the guy takes off his mask and says, "Aha, I'm your father." But there are lots of story beats that lead up till that you've got to emphasize along the way. That moment of significance doesn't have to be the big ta-da. There's story beats along the way that you hit, and that's really I think is going to be what makes that comic much more approachable on social media. Now, if your storytelling is slower than that, number one, you just got to realize you're going to have a harder time making an audience on social media. But that's where you've got to go back to my initial comments about a page is not an update. So if it's taken you longer to get to a moment of significance, you might be releasing 3 pages at a time, which is going to be easier on some platforms than it is on other. I could see it very easy on Substack. Even if you're doing a vertical scroll on Substack, you could do that much more easily. Promoting that on Blue Sky is going to be a little bit different. You're going to have to take a more creative approach to that. But there's even ways of doing that. This consult I did last week, I've got a 7 page comic, but Blue Sky only lets me post, what is it, 3 or 4 images. And I showed him how the Blue Sky image aspect ratio is a 4:5 aspect ratio, and he can fit several panels into that. And so he could do 7 panels, depending on how he arranged it, into each one of those 4:5 aspect ratios. You got to put your creativity into that. You are a creative person. These problems have creative problems. Okay, let's go to Chris. How do I regain confidence in my ability to start creating comics again? Oh man, Chris, what are you doing? This is so. How do I regain my creative? How do I regain my confidence in making comics again? Okay, I got thoughts on that. It took me a minute, but I got thoughts. So much about what we do as cartoonists is wrapped up on social media. And the whole thing there is you're putting things out there and then you get followers, and then those followers give you likes. And then if you have a certain amount of likes, you tell yourself in your brain that, uh, or at least I did, I had 100 followers. And I said, boy, oh boy, when I get to 500 followers, I'll be made in the shade. I can't wait. I'll be a real boy then. And then I got to 500 and life wasn't really much different. And I said, well, 1,000, when I get to 1,000 followers, then I'll be a real little boy. I'll be a real cartoonist. Didn't do it at 1,000. I'll just flip over all the cards. Didn't happen at 2,000. Didn't happen at 3,000. Uh, and the same thing happens with those little hearts underneath your post. The number of number of likes that you get, the number of favorites, the amount of engagement, and of course, and I'm as guilty about this as anybody else. And if you were to have a consultation with me and you're trying to make a living in comics, social media is absolutely one of the things we would talk about. But when you post things and then you get a certain number of followers, and by the way, the number's never high enough. That's the whole point of going to 500 to 1,000 to 2,000. The number's never high enough. Okay, how high is up? And then since you've put all your worth into those social media numbers, a lot of that ends up with you feeling like a failure, right? And I would be willing to bet, even though I don't know you personally, Chris, I know you from online. Uh, I would be willing to bet that a lot of that lack of confidence comes from expecting high numbers. And the dirty little secret of social media is that you don't measure an audience by the people, you measure it by the passion. I've got a very small audience compared to a lot of other people. I've got a pretty small audience. They are passionate about what I do. Okay. Uh, I will take a small, passionate audience over a large, ambiguous audience any day of the week. But you can't say that on social media. I can't point to that on social media because it's not a number, right? And don't forget these follower numbers and stuff. There's no regulation on this. We saw not too long ago, a couple of years, Facebook was clowning with their follower numbers and their like numbers and all this other stuff, favorites. So you're putting so much of your self worth into these stupid numbers that are meaningless. And so I think what you've got to do is get to regain your confidence is to remind yourself what brought you to comics in the first place. And there had to have been something. You enjoyed the storytelling. You enjoyed the act of putting drawings and writing together. You enjoyed the craft. You enjoyed the process. I think you've got to go back to that and enjoy that. And even if you are at a crisis of faith point in your life right now, the answer is start doing comics, start doing a whole bunch of comics, and don't post them. Don't post them. Do it for the enjoyment. You'll maybe you'll post them later, maybe you won't, but just start doing comics and maybe show them to people in your family. Although my family gets tired of that real quick. Uh, but just do it for the enjoyment. Do it without posting it for a little while. Remind yourself what brought you to the game in the first place. That might be a good way of regaining your confidence, especially, and again, I'm a big proponent of this as you're trying to improve, and I think we're all trying to improve. Take those comics that you did and then put them in a drawer and then bring them out a week, 2 weeks later and read them fresh. And then you can see, oh, okay, I can see where my strengths are and I can see where the places where I need to brush up a little bit and improve. Uh, Maybe the answer is just not doing social media for a little while, right? You're all wrapped up in those follower numbers, and that's not what this is all about. That's that's my best guess as to how you can get uh, confidence. That's a toughie. That's a toughie. I feel for you. I really do. I hear the reading in between the lines. How do I get my confidence back? Is a tough area to go to. But I'm telling you, I think the number one culprit is social media. You're getting all bagged up by those numbers, and the best thing to do might just be to hold back and keep those numbers away a little bit. Uh, and don't let those numbers get into your head. So I am going to sign off. Thank you so much again. Uh, if you're interested in a consultation, I've got those that I just popped down into the chat. Of course, you can subscribe to the Webcomics Handbook on Substack, and I'm posting about this kind of stuff all the time. You can also buy my book, The Webcomics Handbook, on Amazon, and that's also a lot of good stuff. I'm very proud of that book. So thank you so much. I guess we're going to end it on that. I appreciate your time. This was fantastic. But we will come back next Friday. Let's make this a date. Next Friday at 2 o'clock Eastern Time. Let's meet back here. Let's talk comics. Thank you so much for showing up today. I hope to see all of you online, and I will hopefully wish you a very happy weekend. We'll see you next Friday.